So, the new MacBook Pros were released quite recently. The last 6 years have been rocky for the MacBook, as many of you probably know, with models being marred by bad keyboards, lack of ports, and poor performance for the price. So, are these new Mac laptops the ones that people have been waiting for? Do these new computers make up for past failures and finally provide a strong offering to creative professionals? Are these MacBooks actually pro? Well, let's talk about it and find out. The model that I will be reviewing is the 16-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro. Here are the exact specs for your reference. Let's start with the outside of this machine. Design-wise, I'm a fan of the thicker, more industrial look. One of the biggest problems with the older MacBook Pros was, as you might already know, that they were too thin for the components that they housed. What I mean is that they would heat up and throttle almost immediately. With this new body design and an improved thermal system, this computer runs cool most of the time that I'm using it. It's a very stark contrast to, say, the 2014 MacBook Pro. That thing gets hot and loud just by opening Google Chrome. So this is a nice and very much welcomed improvement. You can actually use this computer on your lap without getting third-degree burns, so that's pretty nice. More importantly, see what I did there? We got some more ports on these new models. It's sad that this even has to be mentioned, but here it is. We have the re-edition of the HDMI port and the SD card slot. The HDMI port is HDMI 2.0, which can support a single 4K 60Hz display. Some have expressed disappointment that with a machine this expensive, it should have the newer HDMI 2.1 port, which can support up to 8K 60Hz and a 4K 120Hz. If that's something you were hoping for, it's not here. It's not a huge deal in my opinion, since the HDMI port works great, and if you don't plan to get a 8K display to preview footage on, I think you'll be just fine without it. The SD card slot is UHS 2, which is good enough for me, and I'm pretty sure that it's good enough for most people too. Transfer speeds are fast in my experience, and that's all I can really say about it. It's honestly nice to finally have it back. MagSafe charging is also back. I always liked this method of charging. As someone who lost a PC laptop to someone tripping over the charging cable, I think MagSafe is the perfect solution to that problem. And I'm glad it's back, and better than before, since it now offers fast charging. 50% battery life in just 30 minutes. It's actually really good. The 16-inch display on this computer is actually fantastic. I think you would have a hard time finding a better display on any other laptop, period. The screen itself is nearly 4K resolution. The colors look great, HDR content looks great, the brightness is great. It's just a great screen overall. But you know what's not so great? That damn notch in the middle of the screen. So this notch has obviously been a controversial addition. It's there to provide space for the camera, while also giving you as much screen real estate as possible. I honestly don't think it's that bad, and after using the computer for a couple of months, I can say that I've never even really noticed its presence most of the time. It's really not as bad in practice as you might think, unless you have too many menu items at the top bar. You may have seen this video floating around Twitter about menu items going behind the notch if you have enough of them.
What happens if your app menus go too far to the right or your status menus go too far to the left? Do they get smaller, or do they jump to the other side, or are they scrollable? The answer is freaking nothing. If I turn on iStat menus, look at that. There is stuff behind the menu bar that I can't see.
Now, this isn't something I've personally run into, but it's definitely worth mentioning. I don't get how this issue was overlooked. You would think Apple of all companies would care very much about how everything looks in their operating system. But I guess this one slipped through the cracks. The notch is also pretty large for what it is, considering there is no Face ID technology built into it. It seems pretty pointless to have it that large, honestly. Although I'm sure they will eventually have Face ID on a future model, so they are probably just planning ahead for that incremental upgrade. The speakers on this computer sound really good. I have been out of the Apple laptop game for a while, so I haven't heard them in the last 6 years or so, but in comparison to the 2014 MacBook Pro and the Dell XPS 13, these speakers dominate. It's not even close. The bass is ridiculously good. The keyboard on this laptop is pretty good too. It feels really nice and clicky, but I think I would have preferred it to have a little more travel to it. Although I don't know what the hell Apple is talking about when they say it's like a mechanical keyboard, it's definitely not that. However, it's a hell of a lot better than the butterfly keyboard that was plaguing the MacBook Pros for years on the older models, that's for sure. Oh, and get this, no more touch bar. It has been replaced by a regular set of function keys. Adjusting the volume has never been easier on the new MacBook Pro. There's also a fingerprint reader on the top right of the keyboard. It's about as good as you would expect it to be. It works just like any other Touch ID device, fast and reliable. The battery life on this computer is excellent. Definitely will last all day for sure, and probably even several days. Of course, this all depends on how you use it. If you're going to be using it for light tasks like web searching, watching movies or YouTube, writing papers, doing homework, your battery life will be pretty long. If you were to edit videos or do intense creative tasks, you'll notice a shorter battery life. In my experience, the battery life is great, even if you are editing videos on battery power. I once went a whole week and a half with the computer sitting on standby in between short bursts of usage, and it was still alive. I think it had only dropped around 55%. It's actually nuts. I used the Adobe suite to edit, and I think I had the laptop running for about 6 hours before I had to charge it while editing. And this is in Premiere and After Effects, with both of them open at the same time, dynamic link, jumping between the two programs. 6 hours is pretty good to me, especially when performance doesn't take a hit. That's the most important thing to me. Performance does not take a hit while on battery. It's actually insane. And like I said before, I edit on Adobe Premiere, which is not as well optimized as Final Cut Pro, and I use After Effects, which at the time of writing this is not supported natively on Apple Silicon processors. It's very impressive to say the least. One power-related issue that I've run into so far is related to charging. I've noticed that if you turn the computer completely off and try to charge it while the battery is low, the MagSafe charger doesn't seem to actually connect and charge. It keeps disconnecting and reconnecting. You can only charge the computer properly if it's on or in sleep mode. I think this is a software issue, so it should be fixable in an update, but it's still here ever since I got it, so it would be nice to have it updated as soon as possible. It's a problem that should not exist on a computer like this, period. I will say one thing about the battery life. I've noticed that using browsers like Firefox and Google Chrome drain the battery much more than I'd hoped. Safari definitely uses less power, but that's probably because I'm not running my usual Chrome or Firefox extensions on Safari. Either way, if you want to have the best possible battery life on this computer while browsing the internet, Safari is definitely the way to go. One thing that's worth mentioning that I didn't know before is that this laptop does not come with an extension cord for the power brick. The last time I bought a MacBook for myself was in 2011, and back then they all came with one in the box, but now they charge you $20 extra for it. Tragic. I'm sure the reason behind it is to be environmentally friendly. So, by making more boxes to ship more accessories piecemeal instead of in the same package. Bad for the environment anyway, but at least Apple gets to spin it as a good PR story and charge you more while giving you way less. If this is your first MacBook in a while, be sure that you're aware of that inconvenience regarding the charger's extension cable. In terms of performance, this computer performs amazingly well. And as a reminder, the computer that I'm using has an M1 Pro with 32 gigs of RAM. I'm not going to be running any benchmarks here for you. If you are interested in these computers, you've probably seen all the benchmarks millions of times by now, so I'm not going to bore you with any of that or waste my time downloading these programs. If you want to see benchmarks, there's hundreds of other videos about that. The real benchmark for me is my desktop PC, which you might see right here behind me, recording audio. That's my main workhorse computer, so I'm going to be comparing it to that. That may not seem fair since one is a desktop PC with all the cooling you could want, and the other is a laptop. But I personally wouldn't expect a laptop to perform as well as a desktop anyway. This is just a matter of comparison, setting a bar if you will. Sadly for my Windows PC, this thing outpaces it in some respects. Working in Premiere with my 4K GH5 footage, it runs really well on the M1 Pro. It actually runs smoother on the M1 Pro than it does on my Ryzen 2700X 64GB RAM GTX 1080 PC. Typically, I have to make proxies on the PC so that the footage will play back smoothly, especially when skimming through the timeline. But I don't have to do that on the MacBook. I can just take the footage and start editing with no or very minimal slowdown, even on battery. Again, it's very impressive. Hey guys, Future Bobby here. I rendered out the video that you're watching right now. It ended up being about 13-ish minutes. So I rendered it on the PC, and then I rendered it on the MacBook. And the PC finished it in about 26 minutes. And the MacBook rendered it in 16 minutes and 53 seconds. So it's like about 9 minutes faster. I don't know what to do with that, honestly. I guess I should start thinking about getting a new PC? Anyway, back to the video. As you would expect, with any day-to-day tasks like web browsing and YouTube watching, the computer performs really well. It's fast to start up and shut down. Opening apps is super quick. This laptop is great. Honestly, it's a breath of fresh air from the previous missteps that Apple has put out for the past several years. It performs well, the computer lasts all day, or even two, and it's a computer I can rely on when I'm on the go. It's not without its issues, of course, but I think most of those issues are minor and won't ruin the overall experience. But who exactly is this computer for? If you are looking into getting one of these computers, my recommendation really depends on who you are. These computers are specifically tailored for video editors. The video decode and encode engines really give video editors some significant gains in performance. If you're an editor, then you are who will be seeing the most benefit from this machine. That's not to say that this machine is only for video editors, but take in mind what your workflow needs are and if they will benefit from having this computer. If you are a 3D artist, find out if your software of choice is optimized for the new M1 processors, and then find information on how they perform on these computers. You might find that the performance is not what you would expect for the high price tag. If you are a student who is looking for their first creative-focused laptop, I would advise that you skip over this one. The starting cost of $2,000 for the 14-inch model is just too high for a student's first laptop, and honestly, none of the work you do in college will be pushing this machine to its limits. Trust me, I know from experience. Unless you really want to spend top dollar to get a good machine, and you have the budget for it, I would go with something more affordable. If you're a student that absolutely needs a Mac, I would recommend checking out the Apple Refurbished store. You might be able to find an older model of the MacBook Pro for a lot less than full price, and it will serve you well throughout your school years. If you aren't in absolute need of a Mac computer, then you have a wide array of affordable PC options on the table. Now, if you are a professional and you are going to be using this computer every day for video editing, then I would take into consideration compatibility for the editing software that you use. Most video editing softwares are already optimized for the M1 processors, but consider plugins that you may be using as well. Some of those may not be fully functional or compatible at all, and that may affect your workflow. The only people who don't really have to worry about optimization are editors who use Final Cut Pro. Apple's got you guys covered. You're good. If everything you use is good to go, then I would think this laptop would be a very good investment for your business. Now, which configuration should you get? There are quite a bit more than you would think, and it can be a bit confusing and overwhelming. But at the very least, it doesn't seem like there is much of a difference in performance when you are comparing the 14-inch model to the 16-inch model, which is great. The size of your machine won't affect your performance as much as it used to with the Intel MacBooks. But let's get back to the original question. Which configuration should you get? Here's how I would break it down. If you edit 4K video or less, then you don't need anything more than the M1 Pro. Now, how much RAM should you get? I think for most people, you should be fine with 16 gigs. If you don't really get too crazy with your edits or use that many effects, 16 gigs should be more than enough. If you are someone who does more effects, or if you use After Effects as part of your workflow, then I would definitely recommend getting 32 gigs of RAM. The M1 Pro will be good for most video editors, which is good because it's the cheaper option. If you edit 8K footage, have a specific need for 64 gigs of RAM, or make use of complex 3D graphics, then the M1 Max might be the chip you want. Otherwise, the M1 Max is simply overkill for most people. Hopefully this review helps you make a decision if you are looking to buy this laptop. If you think there's something I missed or you have a specific question about the laptop, go ahead and leave a comment and I'll see if I can help you out. That's all for now. I'll catch you next time.
Here's one. MacBook, more like whackbook.
Ha 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 ha.